I sat across from her, the coffee table between us feeling like a chasm. My heart raced, my palms were clammy, and my thoughts swirled like a tornado. There she was, Sarah, my wife of 10 years, sitting in that armchair she always claimed was her safe space. But tonight, it felt like she was a stranger. "You kissed him, didn't you?" My voice came out steadier than I expected, though my chest was ready to cave in. I studied her face, searching for any flicker of guilt, a shadow of regret. Something, anything, that would reassure me I had imagined it all. She blinked just once and exhaled sharply, as though I had accused her of leaving the cap off the toothpaste. Then the words I feared, yet somehow anticipated, came tumbling out. "It was just a kiss, Michael. Stop acting like I burned the house down." Her tone was infuriatingly casual, like we were discussing a parking ticket. My breath hitched, the words catching in my throat. "Just a kiss?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Sarah, you—" I stopped myself, shaking my head, trying to stop the eruption building inside me. She folded her arms across her chest, leaning back in the chair. Defensive. Unmoved. "Yes, just a kiss. It didn't mean anything. Why are you blowing this out of proportion?" Blowing this out of proportion? My mind raced back to all the years we had spent together. The late-night talks, the promises we made to each other, the sacrifices we had both claimed to endure for this marriage. And now, it was all supposed to be reduced to just a kiss? "You burned us down," I said, standing up. The room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. "And I'm leaving you to choke on the smoke." Her eyes widened at that. She wasn't expecting me to leave. She thought this was one of those fights where I'd storm off to the bedroom and we'd pretend nothing happened by morning. "Michael, don't be ridiculous," she said, her voice sharper now. "You're overreacting." "No, Sarah." I grabbed my keys from the counter, not looking back. "For once, I'm reacting exactly how I should." Her voice followed me as I walked out the door, but I didn't hear the words. All I could hear was the echo of her confession, the casual dismissal of everything we had built together. Just a kiss? No, it was so much more. I stepped into my car, my hands gripping the wheel as if it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure I'd ever come back. The night was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe you. It claws at you, forces you to think. I sat on the edge of Andrew's worn-out couch, staring at the blank TV screen. I'd turned it on earlier, hoping the noise would drown out the chaos in my head, but even the blaring ads and sitcom laughter couldn't compete with the storm inside me. I couldn't stop replaying her words. It was just a kiss. 4 little words, but each one felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. How could she say that? How could she reduce what we had to something so insignificant? My mind wandered back to the beginning, back to when Sarah and I were unstoppable. I thought about the first time I saw her, how her laugh had drawn me in before I even saw her face. I thought about our wedding day, how she looked at me like I was the only man in the world. For 10 years, I had believed that look. Now I couldn't help but wonder, was I a fool the whole time? A part of me wanted to blame her entirely, to paint her as the villain in this story. But another part, the part I hated, asked if I was to blame too. Had I missed the signs? The late nights she spent at work, the way she'd been distant lately, the subtle shifts in her tone when she talked about that coworker, Nathan. I had dismissed it all, chalked it up to stress or exhaustion. Was I blind or just in denial? Andrew walked into the room, his footsteps breaking the silence. "You okay, man?" he asked, handing me a glass of water. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to answer. Was I okay? No, I wasn't. But was I falling apart? Not yet. I took the glass and nodded, more to get him to stop asking questions than anything else. When he went back to his room, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I felt empty. The anger was still there, bubbling beneath the surface, but now it was tangled with something else, something heavier. Guilt. Had I been the husband I promised to be? I worked long hours, came home tired, and didn't always notice when she needed me. Had I left gaps in our marriage that someone like Nathan could slip into? I shook my head, trying to push those thoughts away. This wasn't my fault. She made the choice. She crossed the line. But even as I told myself that, the doubt lingered, like an unwelcome guest refusing to leave. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. Sleep wasn't an option. Not when my mind kept spinning, cycling through every conversation, every moment, every kiss we'd ever shared. And then it hit me. That's what hurt the most. Our kisses. They used to mean something. Intimacy, trust, love. Now they were tainted. I couldn't picture her kissing me without wondering if she thought about him. The glass slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Water spilled across the carpet, but I didn't move to clean it. I just sat there, staring at the mess, feeling like it was a reflection of my life. Broken. Maybe I was overthinking it, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay in this limbo. I had to figure out what came next. And I wasn't sure if Sarah was part of that future. Sitting in the lawyer's office was surreal. The faint hum of the air conditioner, the soft clicking of a keyboard from the assistant in the next room. It all felt so mundane compared to the storm raging inside me. Divorce. The word felt heavy, foreign. I'd never thought I'd be here, not with Sarah. But then again, I'd never thought she'd kiss another man and act like it was nothing. The lawyer, Mr. Chambers, was a calm man with a practiced air of professionalism. He adjusted his glasses and glanced at the papers I'd hastily signed, his pen tapping softly on the desk. "We'll need to start with a financial assessment," he said, his voice measured, almost indifferent. "Marital assets, joint accounts, liabilities, all of it." Liabilities. The word barely registered at first, but then he started listing numbers. Numbers that didn't make sense. "Wait," I interrupted, leaning forward in the stiff leather chair. "What did you just say? Loans?" Mr. Chambers adjusted his glasses again, as if bracing for my reaction. "Yes, several loans were taken out under both your names. Significant ones." He slid a document across the desk, pointing to my signature at the bottom of the page. Except, it wasn't mine. "What the hell is this?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "I didn't sign this. I never approved this." His expression didn't change. "These are official documents. The loans were approved 2 years ago. Are you saying you were unaware of them?" 2 years ago. 2 years. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. Sarah. It had to be her. But why? What could she possibly need that much money for? I grabbed the document, scanning the numbers, the dates. Medical expenses. Number home renovations. Number. It was a mix of vague terms and vague purposes. My pulse quickened as I tried to piece it together. "Mr. Chambers," I said, my voice low and controlled, "how do I prove that I didn't sign this?" He gave a small nod, his expression softening slightly. "Forgery investigations are possible, but in marital situations, it often comes down to trust. Do you believe your spouse would—" His words trailed off, but I knew what he was implying. Did I believe Sarah would do this? I didn't want to. I didn't want to think she'd not only betray me with a kiss, but also drag my name into financial chaos without even telling me. But the numbers on the paper, the dates, they didn't lie. As I left the office, papers clutched tightly in my hand. My mind was a whirlwind. The kiss, the lies, the distance between us over the past couple of years. It all felt connected now, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. By the time I reached my car, anger had taken over. This wasn't just betrayal. This was deception. Sarah hadn't just kissed another man. She'd jeopardized our entire life together. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. How many lies were hidden beneath the surface of our marriage? And how much of it was real? I thought I was just grieving a broken heart. Now I realized I might be grieving a broken life. When the doorbell rang, I wasn't expecting it to be Emily. I opened the door, and there she was, standing on the porch with a tight-lipped expression and her arms crossed, as if she'd been rehearsing this confrontation in her head. Sarah's sister, my sister-in-law, the one who had always seemed to tolerate me more than like me. "Michael," she said, stepping inside before I could even invite her in. "We need to talk." I sighed, closing the door behind her. "Emily, if this is about Sarah—" "It is," she interrupted, spinning around to face me. "Look, I know things are bad right now, but Sarah's a mess. She's not eating, she's barely sleeping, and she won't stop crying. I'm worried about her." I leaned against the wall, arms folded, trying to keep my voice even. "She wasn't crying when she kissed another man, was she?" Emily flinched but recovered quickly. "She made a mistake, Michael. People make mistakes." "Is that what she told you?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "That it was just a mistake? A little accident she tripped and fell into?" Her lips tightened. "She told me everything. She knows she messed up and she's sorry. But you're not perfect either, Michael. Let's not pretend this is all her fault." That hit a nerve. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said, her voice sharper now. "You think you're blameless in this? Sarah feels like you've been checked out for years, always working late, always distracted. She needed someone to notice her, and when you didn't, Nathan did." I felt my jaw tighten, the words stinging more than I wanted to admit. Was there truth in what she was saying? Maybe, but it didn't justify what Sarah had done. "So what?" I said, shaking my head. "This is my fault? She kisses someone else, and I'm the one to blame?" "No," Emily admitted, her tone softening. "But you can't just walk away without trying to fix it. You're her husband. If you love her, you fight for her." I laughed bitterly. Fight for what? For the marriage she destroyed? For the trust she stomped on? Tell me, Emily, how exactly do I fight for something that doesn't exist anymore? She didn't answer right away, and for a moment, the room was filled with the tense silence of two people who both thought they were right. Then she sighed and rubbed her temples. "Look, Michael, I'm not here to excuse what she did, but I know my sister. She's not a bad person. She's lost, she's scared, and she doesn't know how to fix this. She needs you to at least hear her out." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice rising. "Do I get to be lost and scared too, or is this just about her feelings?" Emily's gaze softened, and for the first time, she looked less like the fierce protector of her sister, and more like someone genuinely trying to help. "You both deserve to be heard," she said quietly. "I just don't want to see you throw away 10 years without giving it a real chance." I shook my head, walking past her to the kitchen, needing space to breathe. She didn't follow, but her words lingered like an unwelcome guest. Was she right? Had I checked out? Had I left Sarah vulnerable to someone like Nathan without even realizing it? The questions gnawed at me, but they didn't change the facts. When Emily finally left, she looked back at me with something between hope and pity. "Think about it, Michael," she said. "You don't have to forgive her, but don't let anger be the only thing driving your decisions." As the door closed behind her, I leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. Emily had given me plenty to think about, but none of it made the betrayal hurt any less. I didn't expect to hear from Sarah so soon, let alone agree to meet her. But when she called, her voice sounded raw, almost unrecognizable. "Please, Michael," she'd said. "We need to talk, just once. I owe you the truth." Truth. That word carried weight now, like something foreign and heavy that I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. Still, I found myself sitting across from her at the cafe we used to visit when things were good. Back when we'd sit for hours, laughing, planning, dreaming. Now the space between us felt insurmountable. She stirred her coffee endlessly, as if the act could steady her shaking hands. I watched her, waiting. I wasn't going to make this easy. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to do the heavy lifting. Finally, she sighed and looked up at me. Michael, I know you think the kiss was the start of everything falling apart. But it wasn't. It's more complicated than that. I narrowed my eyes. Complicated? You mean there's more? My voice was sharp, even to my ears. Her face fell, but she didn't flinch. No, there's nothing more with Nathan. That's over. But the truth is, I kissed him because I was angry. Hurt? I repeated, leaning back. What, Sarah? What could I have possibly done to make you the victim in this? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. I thought you were having an affair. I blinked, stunned into silence. Of all the excuses, this was the last thing I expected. What? You were so distant, Michael, she said, her voice trembling now. You were always working late, always distracted. And then there was her. Her? I frowned, genuinely confused. Your coworker, she said. Emily told me she saw the way she looked at you at that company dinner, and you never mentioned her, not once, even when I asked about your day. I started thinking, maybe there was something going on. I stared at her, the weight of her accusation settling in. You thought I was having an affair, I said slowly, my voice low. So, you decided to kiss someone else? That was your solution? No, she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't like that. I wasn't trying to get back at you. I was just, I don't know. I was lonely, Michael. I felt invisible. Invisible? My laugh was bitter, hollow. You were never invisible to me, Sarah. I worked late because I wanted to build a future for us. For you. And you thought that meant I was sneaking around? I didn't want to believe it, she said, her voice breaking. But the doubt, it consumed me. And Nathan was just there. He noticed me. He listened. And I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I shook my head, anger and disbelief swirling in my chest. You didn't just make a mistake, Sarah. You made a choice. You chose to believe the worst about me without even asking. You chose to destroy our trust instead of fighting for it. She wiped at her tears, her hands trembling. I know I messed up, Michael. I know. But I need you to understand why I felt the way I did. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. Understand? I could understand if you came to me and said you were struggling. I could understand if you told me you were scared or insecure. But you didn't. You went to him. And now you're asking me to understand? Her silence was deafening. I stood, tossing a few bills on the table for the coffee I hadn't touched. Here's the truth, Sarah. You didn't just doubt me. You doubted us. And I'm not sure there's anything left to save. As I walked out, her sobs followed me, but I didn't look back. This time, I wasn't sure I ever would. The first week apart was a blur. I threw myself into work, into running, into anything that could keep me from thinking about Sarah. Every night I came back to Andrew's place, collapsing onto his old couch that smelled faintly of his dog and takeout. It wasn't home, but at least it wasn't filled with ghosts. My phone buzzed constantly at first. Texts from Sarah, missed calls, voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to. I'd stare at the screen, my thumb hovering over the notifications before swiping them away. What was the point? She'd already said enough. The nights were the hardest. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if she missed me or if she missed the comfort of what we used to be. Was she sitting on our couch, thinking about me? Or was she thinking about him? One night, curiosity got the better of me. I opened her texts, scrolling through the messages she'd sent over the past week. I'm sorry, Michael. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, can we just talk? I miss you. I miss us. United States. That word hit harder than I expected. There wasn't an us anymore, was there? Not the way there used to be. I closed the messages, feeling more hollow than before. Meanwhile, Andrew tried his best to help, but his idea of help was a little misguided. You need to get out, man, he said one night, handing me a beer. Meet new people. Have some fun. Sitting here brooding isn't going to fix anything. I knew he meant well, but the idea of meeting new people felt like betrayal, even now. I wasn't ready to move on, not when my heart still felt like it was in pieces. Across town, I imagined Sarah's life was unraveling in its own way. I didn't need to guess. Emily called me one night, her voice tight with frustration. She's not doing well, she said without preamble. She's trying to keep it together, but she's falling apart. You should call her. I rubbed my temples, frustration bubbling up. Emily, I'm not the one who kissed someone else. She made this mess. She can figure out how to clean it up. She's your wife, Emily shot back, her tone sharp. You can't just abandon her. She abandoned me first, I said, my voice rising. And right now, I'm just trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces she left behind. Emily sighed, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice. You don't have to forgive her, Michael. But don't forget she's human. She's hurting too. After that call, I couldn't shake the image of Sarah sitting alone in our house, the same way I felt alone here. Were we both just two broken people trying to navigate a life we shattered together? The next day, I went for a run. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement was the only thing that made sense anymore. As I ran, I thought about all the things I hadn't said to Sarah, all the emotions I'd bottled up. I wanted to hate her, to cut her out of my life completely. But then I'd remember the way she used to look at me when we were happy, the way she laughed at my stupid jokes, the way she held my hand when I was nervous about work. There were moments I still loved her. And there were moments I didn't know if I ever could, again. Separate lives. That's what we had now. But no matter how far apart we were, she was still in my head, in my heart, in the spaces I couldn't seem to fill. And that was the worst part of all. It was Claire who finally made me stop running. Not literally, but emotionally. I met her at a friend's dinner party, one of those events Andrew forced me to attend because he thought I needed normalcy. I wasn't looking to meet anyone, and I definitely wasn't ready to start over. But there she was, bright, warm, and unassuming, with a smile that somehow made the room feel lighter. We talked briefly at first, mostly polite small talk about work, hobbies, the weather. I figured she'd forget me the second the night ended, but she didn't. Over the next few weeks, she showed up in my life in small, unexpected ways. A casual coffee meetup, a friendly text to check in. It was strange. She wasn't pushy or overly familiar. She just listened. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself opening up. Why do you keep running? She asked one evening after I told her about my newfound obsession with jogging. I smirked, deflecting. It's good cardio. She tilted her head, her gaze steady. It's also a good way to avoid sitting still, to avoid thinking. Her words stayed with me long after that conversation. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was running, not just to escape Sarah, but to escape the parts of myself I didn't want to face. Sarah, meanwhile, had been silent for weeks. I figured she'd finally given up on trying to fix what was broken. But then the letter came. It was sitting in my mailbox, neatly folded in an envelope addressed in her familiar handwriting. I almost didn't open it. Part of me didn't want to read her apologies, her excuses, her pleas for forgiveness. But curiosity won out. The letter wasn't what I expected. It wasn't defensive or dismissive. It wasn't full of blame or justification. It was raw, vulnerable, and painfully honest. She wrote about her fears, her insecurities, and the deep loneliness she felt during the years I thought we were fine. She admitted to kissing Nathan not because she loved him, but because she wanted to feel seen. And she ended the letter with a simple line that hit me harder than anything else. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you'll let me try to earn it." I sat there for a long time, the letter crumpled slightly in my hands. Her words stirred something in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an ache. An ache for what we had, for what we lost, for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth saving. Claire called later that evening, her timing impeccable as always. We talked about everything and nothing, her laughter easing the tension in my chest. But as I hung up, I couldn't ignore the growing conflict inside me. Here was someone new, someone kind and uncomplicated, offering me a chance to start fresh. And then there was Sarah, my wife of 10 years, trying to reach out from the wreckage of our past. Two paths, two futures. And for the first time, I realized I'd have to choose. Not just between them, but between the man I wanted to be and the man I had become. Claire made me feel whole. Sarah reminded me of what it meant to be broken. But somewhere in the middle of it all, I had to find myself again. The question was, would I do it with her or without her? I thought I'd seen the last of Sarah's sister, Emily, after our last conversation. But life has a way of pulling people back into your orbit when you least expect it. This time, it wasn't a friendly knock at the door or a concerned phone call. It was Sarah, on the other end of a text, her words sharp and biting. "So, you're confiding in Emily now? What's next, Michael? Moving in with her?" I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Confiding? Moving in? Where was this coming from? The answer came the next morning. Emily showed up at Andrew's place unannounced, her face a mixture of defiance and guilt. "We need to talk," she said, stepping into the living room without waiting for an invitation. "Funny, I'm getting tired of hearing that phrase," I muttered, closing the door behind her. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "Sarah knows we've been talking. She's upset." "Upset?" I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "About what, exactly? That I dared to have a conversation with her sister while she was too busy destroying our marriage?" Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's not that simple, Michael. She thinks there's something going on between us." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, disbelief mixing with anger. "She what?" "She's convinced that you're leaning on me in ways you should be leaning on her," Emily said carefully. "And, well, I guess, she thinks it's more than that." More than that. The accusation hung in the air, absurd and infuriating. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Let me get this straight. She kisses another man, lies to me about it, and now she's playing the victim because I dared to talk to you? Unbelievable." Emily flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she said, "Look, I know it's not true, but Sarah doesn't see it that way. She's hurt, Michael. And maybe I shouldn't have gotten so involved." "You think?" I snapped, pacing the room. "You've been meddling in this from the start, Emily. First, you defend her. Now you're making me out to be the bad guy because I needed someone to talk to." She stood, her voice rising. "I was trying to help. You both are so busy being angry and hurt that neither of you is actually listening. Do you even want to fix this, Michael? Or are you just looking for an excuse to walk away?" The question stopped me in my tracks. Did I want to fix this? I didn't even know anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in this gray area, caught between Sarah's guilt and my own unresolved anger. Emily softened, her tone quieter now. "I care about you both. I didn't mean for things to get so complicated. But maybe you need to figure out what you want before you let this spiral any further." As she left, her words echoed in my mind. What did I want? Forgiveness? Closure? Or a clean break from the mess we'd made of our lives? That evening, I sat alone, the weight of Sarah's accusation pressing down on me. It wasn't just about Emily. It was about trust, how fragile it was, how easily it could be shattered. And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just Sarah who doubted me. I was starting to doubt myself. When Sarah asked to meet one last time, I almost said no. I'd been living in this limbo for so long, between anger, guilt, and the faintest flicker of hope, that the thought of sitting across from her again felt like reopening a wound that was only beginning to scar. But something in her voice stopped me. It wasn't the Sarah who dismissed her actions as just a kiss. It wasn't even the Sarah who wrote that heartbreaking letter. It was someone else entirely, raw, broken, and pleading. We agreed to meet at a quiet park, away from the noise and prying eyes. I arrived first, sitting on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. The air was crisp, and the distant laughter of children felt like a cruel contrast to the heaviness in my chest. When she arrived, she looked different. Tired, vulnerable. There was no makeup to hide the bags under her eyes, no polished facade. Just Sarah. "Thanks for coming," she said softly, sitting down a few feet away from me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. She took a deep breath, wringing her hands together. "I know you probably don't want to be here, and I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now, but I need to say this. All of it." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Go ahead, I'm listening." She hesitated, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about what I did, and I hate myself for it, Michael. Not just because I hurt you, but because I let something so beautiful turn into this." Her voice cracked, and for the first time in weeks, I saw tears in her eyes. Real ones. Not the defensive, manipulative kind. "I was scared," she continued, her voice trembling. "I've been scared for years, scared that you didn't love me anymore, scared that I was just a piece of furniture in your life, something comfortable but invisible." "Invisible?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Sarah, I've spent 10 years building a life with you, sacrificing, working, trying to give us everything. And you think you were invisible?" She flinched but didn't look away. "I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's how I felt. And instead of talking to you about it, instead of facing it, I let myself believe that someone else could fill that void. And I was wrong. So wrong. The silence between us was thick, oppressive. I wanted to yell, to scream, to tell her how much she'd hurt me. But I also wanted to reach out, to hold her, to erase the pain in her eyes. "I don't know if I can fix this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to try. Not for you to forgive me, not right away, but because I can't walk away from what we've built without fighting for it. For us." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the decision before me. This wasn't just about the kiss or the lies, or even the betrayal. It was about whether I could see a future with her in it. I stood up, looking out at the park, at the children playing, the couples walking hand in hand. Life, moving forward, no matter how broken. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah," I said, my voice steady but heavy. "But if we're going to try, we do it the right way. No lies, no blame, just honesty." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's all I want. A chance to be honest." As we walked away from that park, side by side but still miles apart, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. Whether it was healing or the end, I didn't know. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were finally moving toward something, instead of running away. I stood outside her house, clutching the letter she'd written me. It was crumpled now, the edges torn from where I'd folded and unfolded it so many times. The words were etched into my mind. Her apologies, her admissions, her desperate hope for a second chance. It was all there, raw and real. But was it enough? The porch light flickered, a faint hum in the cold evening air. I'd driven here without thinking, my mind spinning with all the conversations we'd had, all the memories we'd built, and all the ways we'd torn them apart. Now, standing here, I wasn't sure if I wanted to knock or just walk away. The truth was, I didn't know what I felt anymore. Anger? Yes, that was still there, a sharp edge that hadn't dulled with time. Sadness? Absolutely. But beneath it all, there was something else. A pull. A whisper of what we used to be. I took a step forward, my shoes crunching on the gravel. Through the window, I could see her silhouette moving around the living room. She paused, as if sensing something, and then disappeared deeper into the house. For a moment, I thought about what she might be doing. Was she pacing, like she always did when she was nervous? Or was she sitting with her head in her hands, waiting for a knock that might never come? The weight of the decision pressed down on me. If I knocked, I was opening the door to something I wasn't sure I could handle. Painful conversations, grueling efforts to rebuild trust, and the constant shadow of what had happened. But if I walked away, I was leaving behind 10 years of love, of shared dreams and promises. For good. I thought about Claire. She was simple, easy. With her, there were no jagged edges, no ghosts of betrayal lurking in the corners. She represented a fresh start, a life free from the weight of this mess. But she wasn't Sarah. And that was the problem. I glanced down at the letter again, the ink smudged from where my hands had gripped it too tightly. Her last line echoed in my mind. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you'll let me try to earn it. Did I have it in me to let her try? My hand hovered over the doorknob. The cool metal was solid under my fingers, grounding me, forcing me to decide. Knock or leave. The memories came rushing back. Our wedding day, her laugh, the way she used to look at me like I was her entire world. And then the pain. Her confession, the betrayal, the sleepless nights spent wondering where it all went wrong. I closed my eyes, exhaling a shaky breath. Knock or leave. The door remained closed. My hand dropped to my side. I turned and walked back to my car, every step feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. But then I stopped. Halfway down the driveway, I turned back, looking at the house one last time. The light in the living room flickered again, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw her shadow near the window. I hesitated. Knock or leave. And that's where I stayed, caught in the space between past and future, love and loss, forgiveness and finality. The choice was mine to make. But in that moment, I didn't know if I could. I